Kristy Norter, who is today's guest on the Backstage Creative, has had such a cool career through the Broadway world, and I am so excited to share this conversation with you. Welcome to another episode of the Backstage Creative. My name is Krista Copper. On this podcast, I interview people who work behind the scenes of theater. It is an honor and a privilege to have conversations with people who have dedicated their lives to create live productions. I learned so much from doing this. At the end of every conversation, I always think that was the best use of that hour. Of all the things I could be doing with any amount of time throughout the day, having conversations with people about art, about theater and burnout and creativity and collaboration, problem solving, it has impacted my life so positively. Hopefully it's if you've been listening to several of these episodes, it's had the same effect on you. It is a weird time to be thinking about theater. We're coming up on a year since the pandemic kind of officially started back in 2020. So it is weird to talk about theater. This is the only part of my life right now that is theater related, is this podcast. I haven't been involved in any like digital or virtual productions. I've just been going on throughout my day doing my non arts related job, and always with the hope of doing theater again someday. I'm always looking for people to interview. If you have a suggestion of someone to interview, please reach out to me. You can email me at kakopper1@gmail.com, kakopper1@gmail.com, or find me on Instagram or Facebook. Most of the time, I find these guests by scrolling social media while watching probably Star Trek. Right now, I'm working through Deep Space Nine. I just finished Voyager, but right now I'm rewatching Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And so while I'm relaxing in my comfy chair watching that, I'm usually scrolling through social media, seeing which of my friends are part of productions. And then researching those productions to see who the behind the scenes people are. I'm a member of Maestra, which is how I found out about Kristy Norter. A lot of guests actually have come from the Maestro organization. I find guests in all sorts of random ways. Send me recommendations, please. That would make it easier for me. I'm always trying to diversify who I reach out to. That's something that is really important to me, and it's one of the big goals of this podcast, is just to have a diverse group of people represented in as many different categories as I can, so not just race and gender, but age, geographic location, a stage of career, and also what jobs they do. So yeah, I would love to hear from you. Or if you don't have recommendations and just want to reach out to me and say hello, I would love that as well. I'm just over here hunkered down in a Midwestern winter. It's snowing right now. It's pretty crummy outside. My car battery died, so I'm pretty much recording this introduction to avoid dealing with that. So anyway, we need to get to the interview because I'm just I'm just kind of rambling over here because I'm putting off dealing with my car. Here we go. Here's my conversation with Kristy Norter.
One thing I've never done before, and I just did it like 3 minutes ago before you sent your email, was change the cork on the neck of my saxophone, because it's normally you take it to the repair person and they do it while they do other things. But because of the weather and that I'm not always playing all my instruments all the times, like the cork dried out on my alto because I was using a different alto. And then when I went to play this one, when I put the mouthpiece on, it shredded the cork. And I was like, I mean, it's just cork, but you have to order, like, so it's just like process for something that's silly that I should have known how to do for years and never have. And now I'm like, oh, I'm going to change all my corks. I'm never paying somebody to do this again.
I thought the same thing with like fixing cracks on my bass or like fixing seams. Cracks
Right.
are a little more. I'm like, surely I could just get some like side glue and some clamps. It can't be that hard. But I
Right.
just never. I'm scared to like mess with something.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is that, I live in Brooklyn, but we have a house up in the Catskills. And we've owned this house for almost 11 years. And I'm really into do it yourself projects. So, I mean, I built a dock this summer. Like, I've refinished things. I built tables. Like, so it's not that I'm not mechanically inclined. I just never really thought about it when it comes to my instrument. I've always trusted an expert. And now I'm like, well, I could be an expert. Who's to say I'm not?
Yeah. Even the experts had to start, just by the first one.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's kind of insane.
So I guess we've already kind of started. I always kind of do it sneakily. So, so people don't get like, all right, are you ready? Are you ready? Just start talking. I would love to start. I would love to hear about your background. I mean, I've kind of done some research on you and read some of the articles like you've been in for Maestra, but I'd love to hear where you're from, kind of how you got into music and Broadway, and just the highlights of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I grew up in a suburb of Rochester, New York called Fairport. They have a ridiculously awesome band program. At a certain point, I was actually in a Broadway pit, and there were three of us from the same high school, which I found
Wow.
extraordinary. If we were a New York City based high school, I'd be like, sure. But I mean, for a high school in Rochester that it put out that many talented, instrumental performers was just kind of unreal. I grew up playing in the bands and marching bands and the concert bands, but my real love was the jazz bands. My mentors there were Tom Gadoo and Bill Tiberio. Basically, did the all state jazz and the all county jazz, and we do, and then I decided that I wanted to go into this for a living. My parents were confused, but it was all right. And so I started studying my like late junior high school year with Mike Teitelbaum, who is actually at Ithaca now. He was a graduate student and one of the graduate assistants at Eastman at the time. And so he basically got me into college. So I went to Indiana University and I auditioned classical and jazz. And at the time, they weren't really allowing a double major. So I really wanted to play jazz. So I picked jazz, got a bachelor's degree in jazz studies, and was inspired. David Baker and also Dominic Spera were the two that were running the department at the time. They were fabulous. I learned so much from both of them, but in terms of my current life, Dominic Spera really made my eyes open into being, in essence, a studio musician, a jack of all trades and a good ensemble player, and to not just be focused on being a soloist in life. And so that kind of was the beginning, little did I know, but of me becoming a Broadway player and doing the work I'm doing now. My freshman semester in college, actually, I was primarily a saxophonist. I played flute very badly, but I had never really even touched a clarinet. And he passed out the music for our first concert freshman year of college, and there was like 4 bars of whole notes on clarinet, and I'm in band, and I'm like the nerdy always does what the professor says, and I raise my hand and I'm like, Mr. Spera, I don't play clarinet, I don't have a clarinet. And he looked at me and just sort of went, well, dear, there are 4 weeks until the concert. And then he just turned around and kicked off the band. And I was like, oh my God. Like, it was, it's funny now. I mean, back then I was like, oh my God. And then later someone was like, you can go up to the marching band department and they'll loan you a clarinet, and, you just figure it out. So I started working on my doubles and working more, and then went to grad school, University of Cincinnati. Rick Van Mater and Pat Harbison were there, and again continued like the good ensemble playing and expanding my doubles and playing different styles. And then when I came to New York, I was going to be a jazz star, and slowly I figured out that's really not what I wanted to do. I didn't like going on the road. I didn't This sounds weird, but I'm not as creative as a lot of my colleagues who write their own music and are living the jazz dream of really having a voice. I saw myself more as a craftsperson, in that I like to imitate other people or take something that someone else has written and just try to do it the best I can. I wasn't really interested in creating new content. So that sort of left me in like playing big bands and then playing shows. And so I kind of slowly creeped into the show scene. and have kind of never looked back. But it's been 20 years of trying to build a base of, subbing on shows, expanding my doubling knowledge and the instruments that I play, working as hard as I can to kind of break into this scene.
Yeah, I have so much admiration for woodwind players because you guys have to play instruments that are so different from each other. Going from, like in my case, going from upright bass to electric bass isn't so bad, but like going from flute to bari saxophone, I imagine could be pretty hard. So how do you talk about doubling? How you learn to double? Maybe some of the things that you learned about learning all of the woodwind instruments.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is kind of where my jazz training, I think, comes in handy because at a certain period in my jazz studies, what it came down to is you're never done. You're never, quote unquote, there. So to be comfortable with the idea of always changing, always improving, and always seeking new knowledge seems to be a natural thing in the jazz world. And so as a doubler, for me, I really took to Kenny Werner's book. Somebody actually just brought this up recently, so it was sort of fresh in my mind. But Kenny Werner, the pianist, wrote this great book years ago called Effortless Mastery. And his premise was it's not so much that you're good at something or bad at something, it's either familiar or unfamiliar. And I really liked that. It changed the way I practiced, to be honest. Like coming out of grad school, it was like the first time in my life I had never had somebody telling me what to play, but I knew I needed to continue to practice. Well, I'm not practicing for my lesson or for my concert, or so what do I practice? And that book kind of uh, really shook me up in a great way. Basically, it's teaching you how to learn, how to teach yourself, how to set goals. And so that sort of naturally lent itself to doubling in that how did I get good at the saxophone? Well, repetition and studying. And I think it's really natural for some doublers to think, well, what's your first instrument? What'd you start on? And it's like, well, there is no barrier or reason other than my own lack of either time or attention to it that I couldn't be the same on one instrument as I am on my quote unquote main instrument. It's all about familiarity. So if I put in the same amount of time, now having said that, have I put the same amount of time in as on saxophone? No, not yet. But it's there. The potential is there. It's not really. It's just an unfamiliar act that you through repetition make more familiar.
That's a great perspective. I really like that. What are the two instruments that are hardest for you to go between?
I have this is such a weird conversation in that I have weird pinkies. I have double jointed pinkies at the first knuckle that's closest to the nail. And so I really struggle with B flat clarinet because my pinkies lock. Anytime there's certain stuff on the clarinet over the break, it is the thing that gives me the most trouble. So it's not so much switching back and forth, it's just that the pinkies, for whatever reason, the way the saxophone and the flute are set up, it doesn't affect it in the same way. And for clarinet, like pinkies are my nemesis. that's that's where if I were to spend years of my life torturing myself, it would be doing those kinds of exercises. The rest of it, again, was just it's learning the instrument enough that when you pick it up after playing something else, you're not thinking about playing the second instrument. And again, that's a familiarity thing because, like, for me, I had to practice. Like, you can't just practice like the saxophone stuff and then go practice the flute stuff. It's like you said, it's like, well, how do you go back and forth between the two? And the answer is you just keep doing it until you figure out, like, okay, I have a tendency, or it's normal because of saxophone embouchure that you would tend to do this. And so you have to create exercises for yourself to solve that problem on the second instrument. Like, for example, as a saxophonist, I tend to my teeth and my lips tend to be against my teeth. And on the flute, you really want air kind of spinning in front of your teeth, between your teeth and the inside of your lips. And you want space there. So it took a really long time, and I had to sort of mentally come to a place after, studying with a bunch of flute teachers of automatic when the flute comes to my face, it's this embouchure. And that's just doing it over and over and having problem solvers because that's really like I try to study mostly not that it's not okay to study with a doubler, but like, I study with flautists who don't double so that they treat me, you know, you're not doing this. And then I try to problem solve on my own so it becomes more natural.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. When I first started doing shows, I had so much trouble going back and forth from upright to electric.
Uh-huh.
Like I was practicing them separately, and so finally I had to say, "Okay, I'm gonna do 10 minutes on upright and then go right to electric and do 10 minutes and just like practice
Yeah.
going back and forth." Because if you practice them separately, that's fine, but there's something about like quickly shifting to a different instrument that you have to also
Yeah, I
practice.
mean, that's its own skill that you have to practice. And I remember, like, there's a really close friend of mine who's a great flautist in New York. Her name is Janet Axelrod, and we're close friends. But she's also taught me for years on flute. But we're close enough that she can just be blunt with me in lessons, which has led to some hilarious conversations. But oftentimes, like, we've worked together a lot in different places, namely like Radio City, the Christmas Spectacular. She's the regular flautist, and I've had chairs there over the years and sub there over the years. And, I'd go take a lesson and I'd play something and she'd be like, "Oh, come on. Like, you and I have played hundreds of shows together. You would never do that in a performance. Why are you doing it now?" And I was like, "Because I'm thinking about it." And so it was sort of like an aha moment. Like, you have to get me to the place that it's familiar enough that I'm not thinking
Mhm.
because it would affect my normal musical things I would just do on the saxophone. I'm trying so hard to think about, well, what should my face be doing? What should this finger be doing? What should my air be doing that I forgot to be musical?
Mhm.
And that's the part that the repetition fixes. You got to get your head out of it so that you just do. Now I sound like the Yoda of saxophone. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah, that would make a great t-shirt.
yes.
Yeah, you have to make it automatic and just not even.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's
Yeah.
not talent. That's just repetition, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, talent is so overrated. Like any skill you can learn at a high level if you earn it, if you work for it.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, you need to have some semblance of talent in order to get your foot in the door, but then the rest of it is really just hard work and trying to figure out the skill set and then finding a way to train yourself to do that skill set.
Mhm. Yeah, agreed. You've done some really cool shows and some pretty big stuff. Do you ever get I don't know, is it nerve-wracking to play in front of thousands of people? I
Oh yeah.
mean, do you ever feel kind of the bigness of playing on Broadway?
Oh, big time. And actually, I mean, after a lot of years of doing this, recently my current show is the Tina Turner musical. And there was an element in that show where at the end the band is on stage. It like turns into her at a concert, and we are the band, like in the concert. And not only that, but they sing Simply the Best, and I play the big tenor solo in Simply the Best, and I have to walk down some steps and get a spotlight on me. And then I found out after we started that there's like a jumbotron in the mezzanine that is like live broadcasting me playing this solo. And I'm just like, this is so not my life. This isn't me. Like, I was really nervous when it first started happening, and then it got to be fun, but it took me a minute because I'm like, I'm not a rock star. This isn't my world. I just like to hide in a pit and try to play good. That really freaked me out. The other thing that really makes me nervous to this day is I could play for 20,000 people and not think about it. If I know one person in the audience, I'm nervous as heck. It doesn't matter. If it's someone I care about in the
Mhm.
audience, I start getting really tense, nervous, which I think is kind of funny.
Yeah, that's kinda the opposite of maybe probably what a lot of people would say.
Yeah, it's weird. It, like, takes me back, I don't know, to, like, high school jazz band concerts, like, "Are my parents here? Is my best friend here? What's happening?" Yeah, but that sort of stayed with me.
How do you handle those nerves? What do you do with them?
I like to joke around a lot. It's sort of, like dark humor tends to, if you can laugh about it, you can sort of get over it. Breathing, trying to get out of your head, distraction works really well, like there are definitely different types of people in pits. I'm definitely a more uh, have some fun, talk to my neighbor. Everybody does different things to survive playing multiple, 8 shows a week for years. And I'm someone who likes the routine of having like a joke with somebody or we call them bits, where every time, this line happens in the show, we do something kind of keeps us awake and focused more on that than, something like, oh my God, I got a big solo coming up, just to stay loose and have a good time tends to help me. If you're talking about auditions or things like that, because I'm not a classical player. So one thing that was hard for me, Radio City moved to an audition process about 10 years ago. Other than auditioning for college, like that's not my world, and that was weird because going back to what we were talking about earlier, I had to learn how to take an audition, and I got really nervous, and then I had to learn how to get out of my head. Somebody years ago said that studio work was like 99% sheer boredom and 1% absolute terror. And I think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that on Broadway is, very true, especially subbing. I think because I have spent years and years subbing. And that's a skill. And in New York, you can make a living just subbing. You don't even need to have your own show. If you're good and you have a bunch of accounts, you can start subbing for, at one point I think I was subbing like 10 books at the same time. So you could go in and play a matinee on one show and then play the evening show on a different show, different instruments. And that'll get you over it pretty quickly too. That's the part that can be difficult.
Hmm. Yeah, just exposure to it over and over and over. Yeah.
Yeah, to the point that you're just like, oh well, I guess that's not gonna, you know, I guess we can stop doing that, and that's good. That's all
Hmm.
good. You no longer get stressed out, and then you can just chill.
Hmm.
But I don't think nerves are a bad thing, though. I mean, as long as you can control it, if it's not totally ruining your ability to relax and do the job. I mean, that's really it. Getting your head out of the way so that you can do the job you can do. It's okay if there's some nerves there as long as it's not getting in the way. Big performances, that's all. Just stay out of my way enough that I can do what I know I can do.
Yeah, I agree. I think nerves help me focus. Nerves can, get you ready for like, okay, it's game time, like let's go.
Yeah. But I also like I'm a huge if you've looked me up on Facebook, I'm a huge Buffalo Bills football fan. Recently our young, new, awesome quarterback Josh Allen was doing an interview and they were like, "What do you do before big games?" And he said, "I used to be that guy that would turn on those like really pumped up like let's go kind of music that you hear in like a Rocky montage." And then after a while, it dawned on him that that was just wasting a lot of adrenaline and energy. So he goes the opposite direction now and just kind of chills in the locker room, listens to sort of easygoing music to conserve his energy. And so I see the point in that too. And that's part of my like, let's just joke around, let's have a good time, because then you're not like psyching yourself up because you are draining adrenaline and you are draining energy that you need when it comes time for fight or flight. Like this big solo is your fight moment, and if you've been draining the battery all show worried about your big fight moment, then you're going to find the tank is empty and you are in your own way.
I like that a lot. I'm gonna be thinking about that. I like that. I love subbing. I think because it is like I find subbing to be just sheer terror, and it's just your adrenaline's going. You're like, please God, let me help me not to play in any holes, like, um, and
Right.
just like that survival mode of just trying to make it through. I think it's so much fun. What makes a good sub?
To me it's being prepared. A colleague said to me years and years ago, no one needs to know how much you prepared, they just hear the final product.
Hmm.
this is a thing that musicians, young musicians especially, well, how long will it take me to, well, how long should, and it's like, it takes us, going back to Yoda, it takes as long as it takes. So you're learning how to learn shows to sub. So for me, that means that I play, like, let's say I've been offered to sub on a new show, and when I get the materials and a recording of the person in the pit, and nowadays there's usually a videotape of the conductor as well. On Broadway, you have to shadow the book. You sit next to the person you're going to be subbing for an entire show. And it used to be the case that you would go and shadow, and while you're shadowing, you would pick up the physical Xeroxed copy of the book. And back when I started, cassette tapes, and then you'd go do your homework. And after a while, I'd be like, well, I didn't know anything about the show when I was watching it. So really, I need to watch it a second time before I perform, because now I know what I need to look for. And so for me, that sort of modified into, when someone asks me nowadays if I want to sub on a book, they send a scan of the book and their materials, in a Dropbox file. And I do all my homework ahead of time. And then I choose to watch a few days before my first show. I treat it as a dress rehearsal. And that to me is more important, because, like, when you're watching without knowing what's in the book, you're like, yep, that's a band, yep, that's a conductor, yep, they're waving their arms, cool. But that doesn't give you the, oh my god, holy crap, big solo moment of, like, this is the exact movement that the MD is about to do. When you go in there and you're like, okay, this is the moment I need to zero in, and I'm looking for this and I'm listening for this. So it's really a better measure to have some knowledge of the book before you go in and shadow. The other thing that I found was being comfortable with the music. So, like, if I have a book, I'll play the show once a day for as long as I have, usually like 10 days to 2 weeks. And I will make myself play the show from start to finish every day for 2 weeks. If there's something difficult in the book that I need to actually, like, practice with a metronome, that's separate. But I run the show every day. And what that does, basically, I have my own period of time to, basically, you make all the mistakes that you would make subbing for 2 weeks.
Mhm.
Just keep going till you've made all the mistakes possible. And then you learn from those mistakes. So when you're actually playing your first show and you're really, really nervous, it's saved me at times, because, like, if you're reading and really reading the music to try to play, you're not that familiar with it. I mean, I'm still using, it's not like I memorize the music, but you're looking at something and you know what you're about to play. The confidence that that gives you, that can be felt by the musicians around you, and it can be felt by the conductor. They feel your confidence, and not arrogance, confidence. When I watch the book 2 days before I go into play and there's the big moment, and the conductor sees that I'm not looking over the shoulder of the musician at the music going, oh my god, it's a solo. I'm looking at the conductor, fully confident, as if I'm about to play the passage, and watching I'm watching their downbeat for the big solo. And then I meet, have eye contact with them, like, okay, I know that this is my big moment, and I'm watching you like a hawk. So when you go in and play your first show 2 days later, you've already given them a little bit of confidence in your ability to do a good job. You've made eye contact with them. They see that you're not a total idiot, and that you're not, like, that you've given respect to their show, that you've given respect to the music and the section, and that any mistake that you do make, and I make mistakes, are honest mistakes, not lack of preparation. We all trip from time to time, but there are definitely mistakes that are lack of preparation and honest mistakes. And that's just the point. Get yourself to the place where you're only making honest mistakes.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that. How do you take care of yourself physically? Right, like playing is a physical thing, and you're switching
Yeah.
instruments and you've got neck straps, and it's not always the most, our bodies aren't in always the most natural position all the time when we're playing our
Yeah.
instruments. So how do you take care of yourself physically so that you can do 8 shows a week?
Well, doing the 8 shows a week, I should make more time for doing the right kinds of stuff to take care of myself. What I have noticed is, and I've had conversations with a lot of my peers, It's sort of remarkable how many of us are in chronic pain because we are athletes. Small, refined movements in the same position. And like you said, it's unnatural to have something hanging around your neck. It's unnatural to turn your head a little bit to play the flute with your shoulders. And so for me, as I'm getting a little older, I mean, I don't like yoga, but I get the point of it. And I have found myself definitely doing it from time to time to sort of loosen up certain aspects. I have a lot of chronic neck and shoulder stuff from weird posture. So for me, it's more about trying to stretch, stay limber, do those kinds of things. But I think inevitably, what we do, there's going to be some pain involved. It's just interesting as I'm getting a little older. Oh, I guess my neck is always going to hurt. Okay, cool. Like, it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's a price to pay for being a musician, I think, and it's sometimes that's a physical price, sometimes it's okay, all of my money has to go to fixing my instrument price.
Yeah, absolutely. I would add to that like a mental price in that I moved to New York. I wanted to do it all. So there's almost an obsession with never saying no to a gig. And that, emotionally, I would say, I was a workaholic. This year off, I keep calling it my sabbatical. I'm like, I'm on sabbatical. I don't know what you mean. It's been really cool because it's sort of the end of a process that I've been trying to put into my life in the last like 6 or 7 years. And that is like, it's okay if I take my foot off the gas pedal for a minute from time to time. While I live in Brooklyn, I have a house in the Catskills, so I can actually feel when I'm getting a little crunchy, and I will make time to come up here for a couple days, take off some shows, come up here. I'm on a lake, it's pretty, I go fly fishing or even just grilling something and having a bonfire. I just find it relaxes my brain and also makes it easier for me to focus musically. It's more of a just resting my mind and resting my work ethic because the energy it takes to do all of this is tremendous. What we give up sometimes to make it, if you will, that's hard.
Mhm.
And as I get a little bit older, it's like, oh, it never ends either, does it? Okay. So it's like this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So I needed to find some things to just relax, in essence, kind of meditating, but for me it's more of a being in a place where I can just enjoy myself and do things emotionally.
Yeah, yeah, it's a hard industry. It can be hard. I mean, I find it hard to navigate at times, like self-care and networking and how much do you charge people? Like there's just so many little things that go into being a musician and or really any career in the arts, like being an artist, that you have to take into account and you learn by crashing and burning a lot of the times, and then hopefully eventually you kind of get a system in place for yourself. But
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes when I meet people that are very grounded with doing what is good for them and their families, I'm almost like, but how will you like they confuse me. I'm like, but how do you just do what you want to do with your family all the time and not worry about it? It was sort of like okay, I have to find a way to be able to do both, to be able to be make reasonable sacrifices, but at the end of the day, like what kind of life do you want? Like, and I want to have a good family situation. I want to have a good downtime situation where I can, relax and just be me and enjoy. Like, why else are we working? Like I had a joke for a while that I was just like, well, I work so I don't have to drink shitty beer, forgive me for cussing. But, it's like, well, I work hard so that in essence, when I'm off, I can enjoy that time and not be stressed about it.
yeah, that's good perspective. So you also are a music coordinator. What in the heck does a music coordinator do?
It's a contractor, music contractor.
Okay.
But there's a mild bit of confusion in the technical terms of it. I mean, you'll hear people call them the contractor as well. I think that the music coordinator position, like the title, if I had to guess, it would be because of the wording and the old school Broadway setup. So if you read the Broadway collective bargaining agreement, which I'm sure you're going to run right out and do after we get off this podcast because it's just some light reading, they discuss the contractor as a person who is in house. They play in the band, they work, and from what I understand, back in the day, each theater had its own orchestra. So if a show came to that theater, that contractor would hire themselves, they would be on it and then they would hire the rest of the orchestra or whoever was needed for that particular show. That has evolved to is that there have been some contractors over the years who kind of created an additional position. So they really are the contractors, but I kind of call it like the outhouse contractor as opposed to the in-house contractor. So nowadays, the outhouse, as the coordinator, if you will, you still hire the band, you still monitor everything, you're still the person who is the go-between for the producers. You advise the producers, but you don't necessarily have to play in the band. While you set up payroll and get it going, once the show is up and running and is, on Broadway is not a limited thing, it could go forever. You have your in house contractor, which is a member of the band who gets paid extra to run the payroll and do the day to day in the theater stuff. Coordinator is just sort of like I don't know, it's more of a supervisor. It is the contractor position, but on Broadway, it's just a little bit more in that you're handing the day to day stuff to someone in the band. But it's spreadsheets, contracts, people, relations, dealing with the labor unions, dealing with producers, dealing with the creatives on the show. For example, like I'm music coordinator for Six, that's hopefully going to have their official Broadway opening eventually. But at a certain point, the musicians are all on stage, and the hair and makeup designer for the show really wanted the women in the band to like glam up and do massive like stage makeup every day and such. And so they were wanting them, and I was like, well, we can do that, but you need to understand within the contract that changes what they're getting paid. So it's those kinds of things like, according to the contract, you can have anything you want, but you got to pay for it. And so, the hair and makeup are like, oh, okay. And then I'm like, yeah, so then you go to the general manager and you say, hey, so hair and makeup really wants the women to do this. This is probably what it'll cost you. And of course, the hair and makeup is now not, it's no longer required.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that kind of stuff in learning how to just sort of be the go between. I think initially a lot of people, it was my thought about it early on. Like when you hear about a contractor, it's like, oh, they're the people that hire the band. And I was like, that's what they do. And now I'm like, that was so wrong. That is like a fraction of what they do. And nowadays, they don't even get to hire the band half the time. They're told who to hire. It's not the same as old school contractors where like they had their pool of people and they're like, I'll get you a band. You tell me what you need. And this is my band. Nowadays, everybody's got an opinion from the orchestrator to, the ticket salesman. Like it's somebody knows somebody and they want this person in the band or this happened and the orchestrator only works with this person, and so you're pretty much handed a list. I mean, with Six, they brought in the women that did the last run out of it in Minnesota, so they had their band before I was even hired. So now what? You're the coordinator but and the contractor, but you didn't hire them. But that's sort of the job these days, making it work.
Hmm. Yeah, the politics of Broadway.
Yeah, politics of everywhere, honestly. But yeah. So yeah, coordinator is basically another term for contractor.
What do you like about that job?
Spreadsheets. I'm such a math nerd, and I come from a family of accountants and money people, and I was always very good at math, but went into music, so I wasn't really thinking about a career in. I mean, obviously, if you have good math skills, that they say that kind of works hand in hand with being a musician. But I really like numbers and spreadsheets, and so for me, like the most fun I've had in contracting has been designing my own payroll templates on Excel, which sounds like the nerdiest thing on the planet. And I would geek out. I have a couple colleagues that I would be like, "Oh, I just figured out this thing on Excel. Did you know you could do?" So we were trying to like one up each other, like trying to figure out how to automate certain things. And I've even taken it as far as signed up for a couple of like advanced Excel classes during the pandemic that I just signed up for them. So I'm getting ready to start doing that. It makes me really happy. And I know that there have been, there are definitely templates that people use for their Broadway shows and they pass them down from in-house contractor to in-house contractor, or maybe the contractor has one that they give their in-house contractors. And I was like, I really want to understand it from the bottom up. So I want to start from scratch and build. I don't want to use, I mean, I looked at some other templates just to get an idea that I was on the right path and was able to sort of be like, yeah, I get what they're doing here, but I think that's too many steps. Like, I think I can streamline it by doing this and this. My goal is to create a spreadsheet that's sort of idiot proof so that when I give up doing the payroll and the in-house person does the payroll, that it will be something that is easy and accessible for them and to hopefully avoid mistakes. That's the other thing, the weight of it. Like the first few times you're like, yeah, I made a spreadsheet. And then you're like, wait, I literally made a spreadsheet. This is what people are getting paid. You don't want to make a mistake here. It's exciting. Like the first time a couple of years ago was like one of the first things that I contracted. And when I ended up getting the check in the mail, it was such a silly thing, but I was so proud of it. I was like, "Look, I made this check. I was the one, hopefully it's right, but it's a very serious thing. You're messing with people's money. I mean,
Mhm.
you want to ensure that your colleagues are being paid fairly, correctly, and that the contracts that have been put in place and agreed to by the producers and the unions are adhered to, and that everybody's being treated fairly the way they should be treated. And it's a huge responsibility, but it's not one that I take lightly. I really enjoy it.
Mhm. What are some of the maybe like frustrating things that typically pop up or more challenging general issues that come along with contracting?
Yeah, totally. The hardest one for me, I'm such a dork. I'm a real rules follower. There have been some situations where, and I get it, like I'm the go between the union and management, and each side is going to try to act in their own best interest. That's not to say that anyone's doing anything wrong or trying to go against a contract, but sometimes interpretations vary. It's hard for me when I feel like something's cut and dry in a contract and I'm being asked to enforce maybe a different take on the contract. And so the stubborn part of me is like, no, it's black and white. You got to do this or this. There's no gray. Like, what are you talking about? And it's like, well, that's not really my job. I'm not the decider. And that was the hardest part for me to, I'm the advisor. I'll advise people. It's their choice to do what they want to do after the fact. All I can do is be responsible for the advice I give. I'm not the police officer. I'm not I just advise. People are going to do what they want to do. So if somebody crosses the line and the other side is like, you know what, we're going to take this to arbitration, I just need to be I'm the middle person. I don't take an action one way or the other. I tell you what will happen if the other side doesn't like this, and then I just step back. And that's been hard because I felt like I should be the person who like the buck stops here, like no, we're going to do the right thing, and it's like no, I'm not the decision maker, and that was really tough for me to get in my head. It's interesting. And it's always little weird things. Like if you ever start reading contracts and you start wondering like, why is this in a contract? I can almost guarantee you there's some bizarre story about some weirdo musician who did this one thing one time and it got put in the contract so it never happened again. There's always good stories in the weirder elements of the contracts.
Yeah, I'm sure. Green M&Ms, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
So Like back in the day when you were doing, like 8 shows of Tina a week, how many shows would you be able to be contracting at one time? Do you just only work on one show at a time? Can you have multiple shows that you're contracting at once? What does that look like?
You can have as many as you want. I mean, as many as people will offer you. I'm fairly new as a coordinator, so I was really fortunate last summer that I was doing two off Broadway shows at the same time, which was really cool. But, there comes a time, the opening night for one of my off Broadway shows, I was locked in for Tina rehearsals. So, like, I couldn't even go to my own opening night of my off Broadway show because I was on playing in another show. And at a certain point, you can't, it's as many as you feel you can do. But as I'm, only a couple of years into coordinating and contracting, like, I don't have the problem yet of having too many shows. The other thing is with the Broadway model, because it's not like a regional theater where you have 4 or 5 shows come through the regional theater every year. A show can run, as we know now, like 30 years. So you could have 5 shows in one year and they all only last a month. Or you could have, if you were the coordinator of Phantom, Wicked, and Hamilton, does it matter if you ever coordinate another show? Because you're making money for the duration of those runs. The longer the run, usually your work is done more upfront. Little things will pop up periodically, but I would say after the first year of a show, it's just running. You just make sure it runs, and you pick people that can handle being in a situation like that for a long period of time. I don't know if you caught, there was a podcast, I think it was This American Life, did an episode of the Phantom Pit maybe like 6 months ago. They were interviewing all the different characters, and that's an infamous pit. A lot, there are many of them that have been there the entire run. It's almost 30 years. Same neighbors, same everything for 30 years. And that messes with your head. When they were hired, shows didn't last very long. And then, you kind of hear stories nowadays about how much the background, like the social background of the people you hire is important now, because you might be hiring for the next Hamilton, and those people are going to be together for a really long time. So you have to pay attention to their emotional maturity, their social abilities, as much as playing abilities. You don't want to throw a bunch of people who are very self-centered into a situation like that, because you're just going to inevitably have fights and arguments. And there have been a lot of famous stories over the years of bandmates, section mates, brutal battles, lines with tape actually put on the floor, like, don't move your stuff past this. Yeah, it's funny, but it happens. That's the part too, like the stress of it. Like I said, when I haven't come up to my house and chilled for a couple of months or something, I start to feel crunchy. And like, why am I getting cross with this person for no Oh, because I need to take a day off. Being able to monitor yourself in those situations, it is kind of funny though, how things can elevate,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah, I admire people who not only play obviously well, but also have kind of added another element to their career. A lot of people, especially musicians, can learn from that. Like, yes, play your instrument well. Yes, try to go as far as you can with it, but also realize that it's helpful to have other skills that you can also do within the industry that can help you make a living for yourself and pay the bills.
I mean, and we're all running into that right now.
Yeah.
It's been kind of interesting. Some people teach. I honestly, like, I have been fortunate enough to be getting some like one-off contracting dates. Contracted like a Christmas single for Xena Goldrich, and have done a couple corporate things that have been kind of fun. And so not only am I playing for some recordings and stuff and getting some money for that, but like contracting, and learning the new contracts because I spent some time and had to study hard to learn off Broadway contract. Then six came along. It's like, okay, now I got to learn, and I'm always learning because there's so much to those agreements. You can just keep pouring over them. I'll probably still be finding things for years, but learning the Broadway contract. And now that everyone's at home, I had to learn the television videotape streaming AFM agreement. So I was like, okay, more spreadsheets, new templates, great, new contract, new rules, different rules, and then somebody wanted to, like I said, do a single and they wanted to use the AFM SRLA agreement. So there's a new one and that one actually, because assuming Six does a cast album at some point, that's a contract I feel like I will use a lot in the future. Television videotape, though, I was like, what? I didn't anticipate myself needing to do a videotape agreement.
Mhm.
Someone asked me about a video game thing that may or may not be coming up, and it's like now I have to learn the video game agreement. So it's kind of cool. It's like doubling on contracts. All those skills we talked about before about it's just become more familiar, learn how to learn, and then you can constantly keep achieving these kinds of things. And you'll make mistakes, and I think the good advice been a couple of contractor coordinators who are very successful that have helped me and given me some advice over the last year or so, Steve Gelfand and Michael Aarons. And both of them are like, sometimes it's best when you don't know the answer, don't try to make it up. Just say, I don't know, and let me find out. That's sort of the attitude that I have. I'm learning, and people understand that. But with that, I never answer a question that I don't know the answer to, and that leads me to be as informed as possible because I can kind of be a pain in the butt. AF of M must love me. I'm always like, hey, teach me this thing here, or send me the agreement so I can read this part. Now explain that one more time because it sounds like, X, Y, and Z. And they've been really great. And also 802. Just trying to learn as fast as I can and as thorough as I can from all of the facets of it so, I can see both sides or the multitude of sides and make sure that I'm doing the right thing for everybody. And spreadsheets because who doesn't love math?
Yeah, yeah, this industry, this world, I mean, moves fast, and if you're not always learning and if you're not stretching yourself, you gotta keep up.
Yeah. Like I said before, it's weird. I'm not the artistic kind. I mean, I respect people who, write their own stuff and do all of that. That's great because I wouldn't have a job without people like that. But for me, the business stuff has always been more my likes, my strengths. And so moving into, like a lot of people, well, I'm writing, I'm going to write a quartet. I'm going to do this. I'm going to put out my own CD and do, I'm going to do a recording and it's all my original material. It's like, I respect that. There is not an ounce of me that has the desire, drive, or ability to do that. I'll listen to your project and I'll do you one better. I'm happy to contract for it. I am contracts and money and all of that nuts and bolts, like facts. That to me is my strength. And it's been interesting to sort of, after living in New York City where everyone is an artist, that I'm comfortable now that my artistry is not necessarily music related. It's numbers and spreadsheets, and that's where my artistry is now taking place, which I think is kind of interesting.
Probably not. It sounds like at least not what you had planned.
No, not at all. But I mean, I think if you look back, like all of my family works in some sort of financial numbers, pensions, something, it's kind of funny. Because, like, now I'll call my mom or my siblings and just be like, yo, I got a thing on Excel. How do I? And so it's been kind of funny for like a couple of years. Like, I'm bugging my little brother, hey dude, how do you do, this on Excel? And he's just like laughing. And I was like, well, when you can play saxophone like me, you can give me attitude. Like it's kind of hilarious. But I'm more happy doing that because it's more grounded for me. It's the same part of me that doesn't mind and actually loves playing shows, doing the same thing over and over again and trying to be exact and making it perfect or as close to perfect as you can. I like the certainty of numbers and facts and how different examples come together. And what am I looking for? Like equations. Yeah, that's it. To make things work out, and that there's a definitive answer that speaks to me. The creativity, like in the music world, I love listening to what other people do, but to be honest, it stresses me out. Like, like to come up with my own idea. I was like, no, I want you to tell me if I got the answer right or wrong. That's what I want. That's how I feel good. So this kind of speaks to that for me.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, sure. I can see that. Great. This has been a good conversation. I have one question that I like to ask everyone who comes on the show, and that's advice to young people who want to do what you do. So, advice to either, young musicians who are want to be on Broadway one day, or advice to young music contractors.
First of all, what I always say, like especially when I'm doing a master class, is this is a tremendously small world. So be the person that you want to be in this world. I still run in, like I said, I run into people from high school. I went to sub off Broadway in the Heights, like the show In the Heights 12, 13 years ago. And the drummer was a guy I was in all state and all county jazz band with. We ended up being on the Broadway show together. It's a very small world. And so just be a good person and be helpful, be friendly. You never know who you're going to run into down the road. Beyond that, I would say find the people that do exactly what you want to do and just pester them. In essence, we do best when we mentor as musicians. The apprentice and mentoring situation has existed for centuries for musicians. That's important to what we do as artists, as craftsmen. So you need to align yourself with people who do what you want to do and are willing to share their gifts or advice with you and have them help mentor you into the community that you want to be a part of. Also, with youngins, we all had our moments where we felt very sure of ourselves in our younger years. Try to get out of your head a little bit and just, accept that it is physically impossible for you, even I don't care how talented you are, you don't have the same experience that other people do yet. And the only way you can be a complete package is to take all of your talent and to bring all of that talent to fruition, to be able to develop that talent to its fullest. And that can only come with experience. So you aren't going to get experience if you're a total jerk to everybody around you. I don't care how talented you are. So take a minute, learn from your elders, learn from the people who are more experienced than you, because you have something to learn from absolutely every situation. Even playing with a bad band, you can learn, I don't ever want to do that. I don't ever want to be that.
Hmm.
There's something to learn in every situation. And if you're not taking something away from every performance, you're not looking for it. You're not seeing the bigger picture. And we are an industry, as musicians, it's all about communication. We communicate through our instruments, but it's about communicating, and communication means listening and interacting. That's a skill you can't turn on and off. And I feel like if you're a good listener in life, you're probably a good listener in the performance arenas as well. It's something that carries over. So be a good communicator, and I think you'll be a good musician.
The music for the Backstage Creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Carly Wagner.